Welcome to Immersed. Immersed is a series around music, health, wellness, and technology. Each episode, we bring together a diverse array of perspectives to explore how music and sound can improve our lives. Immersed is brought to you by Studio Feed. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Project Immersed. My name is Cymone. I'll be your host and guide as we journey into this world of the power of sound, psychedelics, and altered states of consciousness. This topic is something that is very near and dear to me, and I feel very honored to be here and very grateful to be joined by three remarkable guests, each of whom are doing amazing things in this space. I am joined by Sara, therapist and creative executive at Mind's iHealth Solutions. I'm also joined by Dr. Bradley Vines, the Chief Science Officer at Wavepaths, a platform providing music experiences for psychedelic-assisted therapy. And last but not least, I am joined by East Forest, a phenomenal multidisciplinary artist, producer, and sound meditation guide. Welcome to each of you, and thank you for being here. We're very excited to have you. Thank you to our audience who will be joining us. We're happy that you're here as well. And to start, I would really love to pass the mic to each of you. I want to go around and just hear a little bit about your journey and your path, what led you into this interesting space, this world of sound, psychedelics, and altered states. Maybe we can kick it off with Dr. Vines.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Tyler. And my background involves research, indeed, into music. So that's my specialty. Having done a PhD in experimental psychology, focusing on music and emotion, and gone on to do postdoctoral work related to neuroplasticity and music, thinking about how what we know about music in the brain can inform therapies for stroke recovery and other kinds of neurological issues. Going back further, I am a saxophonist, and I've always been fascinated by music and the potential for music to take us into other kinds of experiences. And that really is what launched my interest in the mind in general. So I kind of started off thinking about science and music, and then found what I think is a middle ground in cognitive science, cognitive neuroscience. And I've had a chance to do some work in this area. And as you mentioned, now I'm working with a company, Wavepaths, which is doing some exciting work exploring how to develop music in supportive therapy, and in particular, psychedelic assisted therapies.
Amazing. Thank you for being here, Dr. Vines. I'm excited to hear more. Nice. Next, let's pass the mic to Sara.
Thank you, Tyler. Grateful to be all to talk about such an important topic as it relates to the mainstreaming of psychedelics and what all that includes. So my origin story in this field is pretty unintentional, but it's also divine led. And back in 2013, I experienced a lot of personal loss, and I went through a pretty depressive state. And I prayed and I said, Lord, if you get me out of the state, I will surrender to whatever it is that you want me to do. And I heard the divine whisper of marriage and family therapy. And I'm like, marriage and family therapy, that is like everything that I didn't want to do, that I promised myself I wouldn't do anything related to mental health. But lo and behold, I surrendered to that request. And received my master's training in marriage and family therapy, which ultimately led me to joining a private practice in Kentucky led by the wonderful Dr. Monica Williams. And at the time, so this was back in around 2016, Dr. Williams approaches me and she's like, hey, are you interested in learning about psychedelic therapy? Would you be interested in joining this training? And I said, yes, I would, primarily because of two reasons. One, I remember going through my master's therapy training and being introduced by the work of Dr. Gabor Mate and his work on ayahuasca and treating addiction. And I also, just from personal experience, remember my mother, my grandmothers working with plant medicines, not psychoactive plant medicines, but utilizing plants in medicinal ways. And so learning about psychedelic therapy just felt like an extension to who I already was and who I was becoming. And in 2017, I attended my first MAPS therapist training for MDMA therapy for PTSD. And our site eventually became selected to be part of their phase 3 studies, which our site was specifically focused on providing participants of color with a culturally informed therapeutic experience. And after that, I received training in psilocybin therapy and ketamine therapy, and had my reservations about ketamine therapy, but I'll reserve those comments for another time. And now I am the creative executive of a company where we're really trying to change how we talk about mental wellness and how we treat mental illness. And I consider myself a mental health futurist and really exploring what does mental wellness look like in this digital era, in this time and space. And for me, psychedelic therapy is part of that conversation. And I'm very interested in sharing more stories about the ways that music has impacted participants' journey or participants or patients' journeys in psychedelic therapies that I've worked with.
Amazing. Thank you for that. I'm excited to dive in more about your story. East Forest, what about you? Can you share your path with us?
Yeah, I could echo Sarah in some regards in the unintentionality of like sitting here today talking about psychedelics and sound. In 2008, I was living in New York City and was just going through a lot of personal transformation of things breaking down in my life and looking for other answers and opening up to meditation and traditional ayahuasca ceremonies for the first time, among many other new ideas and books and so forth. And I had always been inspired by just a handful of psilocybin experiences that I had had personally in my life from starting around college until in my 20s that were profoundly important to me, but deeply confusing because I'm like, what is that ineffable perfection and how it aligned with music actually. And it was really important to me. But again, I was sort of chasing a feeling. And so out of all this chaos of collapse in my personal life and externally, this was sort of in the financial collapse in New York, Occupy Wall Street, I decided to start just making music for me. And I had no plan with it. I was sort of anti-commercial. I was like, I'm just making this to essentially meditate to on psilocybin, hoping to get to that place again. And I did this for like a year because it was fun, but it was just a little private project. And long story short, in September of 2008, I decided to take some psilocybin to honor that inspiration. And I hit play on the record and put the headphones on when the medicine was activated. And I mean, my life changed. It was this incredibly beautiful, powerful experience of synchronicity and meaning, like my soul had tricked my ego into making this record for me to use like as a tool in that moment. You know, as we all might know, the profundity of those moments that are so special only to us, like the deep synchronicity that's realer than real. It's like it's kind of what we're all talking about. It's like you touch something that is beyond explanation. I think I was talking, oh gosh, I'd really love to get this right. Matthew Fox, the theologian, I was talking to him on my podcast. He's like, when people have mystical experiences, the only response is to say nothing or to create art. And that's why I feel like I've just continued to make music, because that's my only response. I can't really say much about it, but I feel like we all understand. I can feel that we all understand something about that. So a friend of mine he started organizing these circles for me. He got obsessed with that record. I gave it to him, and I was just giving it to people just for free. This is before streaming. And he started setting up circles for me to play live or play this record for people on psilocybin. And I was like, this is crazy, man. But I rose to he's this kind of guy. He's just like, no, we're doing it. It's Saturday, no big deal. He's still a close collaborator of mine, and I probably owe everything to his sort of chutzpah. But I just started experimenting, learning, both from actually going to indigenous ceremonies, researching whatever I could at the time. There was much less information then as far as research on sound healing and music and the brain, and just putting it all together. And for many, many years, we were just doing this in the private shadows and developing a music and a protocol, ceremonial protocol, and that's how everything started. And I will say quite definitively, in 2008, there were no conversations like this. It was not cool. There's like maybe one or two websites. They couldn't even get advertisers. So I never expected that it would be sort of in line with this, where we're at in this moment in time. I think it's quite fascinating and exciting, but unexpected. And I haven't really changed what I've been doing, but it seems more relevant to where we're at as a culture and society.
Amazing. I resonate with so much of what you said, and I'm excited to dig in more with you as well. I guess to start off, something that's really important to me in this conversation, I feel like conversations like this are really important in helping to tell the story of what these therapeutics are and the impact that they can have in people's lives. Maybe we can start with you, Sara, just sharing some of what you're seeing in these sessions, some of the conditions that are being treated. What can these therapies offer people who are in search of some assistance?
Yes. So even to level set the conversation here, I'll talk about what is psychedelic assisted therapy. So psychedelic assisted therapy is a drug assisted therapy that is helping folks treat a variety of mental health conditions. What's currently in the research is MDMA therapy for PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, also psilocybin therapy for treating depression. Ketamine therapy is a legal, available psychedelic assisted therapy that folks can access right now. And ketamine therapy, depending on the clinic that you go to and the practitioner that you're working with, those mental health conditions can range from depression to anxiety to PTSD to even bipolar disorder. And so that's psychedelic assisted therapy in a nutshell. And maybe just to bring in some research specifically for MDMA therapy, the latest research shows that over 60% of participants who go through these clinical trials no longer meet criteria for PTSD post 1 year follow-up, which is pretty incredible, considering that the most medication assisted therapies right now for treating trauma only treat the symptoms, treating the anxiety, treating the depression, taking really the edge off of the symptoms, not really treating the core of what's actually of the trauma. And And yeah, so MDMA therapy has recently been approved by the FDA to be administered in the expanded access program, which means that perhaps in the next year or so, folks across the country will be able to administer MDMA therapy legally outside of a clinical trial, which is quite promising. However, there are lots of issues that particularly as it relates to accessibility. Well, I will say in my experience of being a participant in a healthy volunteer trial for MDMA therapy, as well as witnessing a participant go through an MDMA therapy clinical trial, this medication assisted therapy is powerful. And to share a little bit of my personal experience, I took MDMA in a one-time clinical setting where I got to experience firsthand what this therapy would be like. And there was a screening period that I had to go through, a preparatory period, an experiential, or I had 2 experiential sessions, 1 placebo, 1 active MDMA session, and 2 integration sessions. And with the active dose of MDMA therapy, I remember I was a little hesitant about going into my experience, rightfully so, because this container was not the containers that, I think that really respected the expansive state of my being. But nonetheless, I'm a therapist in training, so I wanted to experience what it was like. But I remember during the onset effects of the medicine or of the drug, I experienced this moment where I connected with my deceased grandmother, and she imparted wisdom not only for me but for my mother, and we shared a beautiful and brief moment. And she really took me to what I conceptualize as the essence of the universe, to the space of divinity. And for the first time in my life, I felt like, adult life, I felt like I had a place where I belong. And me, a young Black woman, I felt like I had a place where I belong. I had a place where I felt free. And so this, to me, I think is just a snapshot of what can happen with these drug-assisted therapies, experiencing freedom, experiencing liberation, and connecting to yourself.
I have chills just listening to that. Thank you for sharing your story. To me, this is an exciting area because it feels like a space where science and spirit are really connecting and overlapping in a really cool way. Thank you for sharing that. Maybe we can jump to Dr. Vines. I've listened to a few podcasts where you talk about neuroplasticity in the brain and how that plays into a number of conditions. Maybe you could speak more on that.
Certainly. So this is one of my preoccupations or obsessions with music. It's neuroplastic potential. So by neuroplasticity, we're talking about the potential for the brain to change. And neuroscience has helped us understand this is a capacity that continues throughout life. It used to be thought that, well, you got to do things early in life in order to get the edge and so on and so forth. But actually, we have the potential to learn throughout life, and there are capacities that improve with age, in fact, like vocabulary and your intuitions and so on. So this is something to harness. It's a potential of the brain that is amazing. We've got these 100 billion neurons up there, approximately, and they are set up to take advantage of opportunities to learn. So just some examples from music learning. Take someone that's never played piano before, never touched a piano. After just 20 minutes of basic practice, just touching the keys, learning some basic scales and fingerings, you can actually measure significant changes in auditory motor associations. So the brain is just ready to jump to your whim, really, in terms of what you want to learn. And music is this great domain for exploring this. Because whereas everyone knows language, fortunate, or mostly, for everyone who's fortunate, but music is something some people may not know. So we can actually look at people who have studied music versus others who haven't, and look at what happens when you start at different points in life and so on. So it's kind of given us a mirror into the way the brain works, which has been very helpful. Now, getting to your question, Tyler. So how is this relevant to therapy? Well, therapy for almost any condition involves change, developing some change from current state in a direction that's favorable. So that when you're thinking about neurological issues, and I would group neuropsychological challenges, mental health challenges in that domain, involves changing the way the brain is functioning. And music can be very helpful. We can harness the potential for neuroplasticity that music offers in order to support the kinds of changes that are necessary to improve well-being. So in the case of stroke recovery, for example, music activates areas of the brain that have language potential, but that are preserved perhaps, whereas areas that in the brain that are usually used for language might be damaged. We can use music to help access those other parts of the brain to enable speech recovery. Therapies that incorporate music just tend to be more enjoyable. So if you have a motor therapy where you're linking a certain physiotherapy movement with music, that's activating reward systems in the brain, dopaminergic systems that will lead you to do that more often, in addition to helping the brain more generally in its neuroplastic change. So that's thinking about, say, stroke recovery, but of course there are applications here for mental health. And when we're looking at psychedelic assisted therapies, ultimately, indeed, we're thinking about neuroplasticity, and that's a major modality of interest for people looking at everything from ketamine to psilocybin and MDMA and so on. How are they achieving these effects, like those that Sara mentioned, this amazing changes, and these changes that are persistent? So what has happened is there's been a change in brain state, of course, and there are direct implications of these different kinds of compounds on the way the brain works that lead to these neuroplastic changes. Music can serve to further augment and support the neuroplasticity involved. So that's really what the hope is for those looking to create music, either thinking about this intentionally or intuitively. It's for that music to support those changes ultimately that lead to better therapeutic outcomes.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Yeah, the power of music. It's one thing that's really interesting to me about this topic is how it's still, like we said, relatively new in the clinical world and as a therapeutic, but it's something that's been around for a very long time. Indigenous cultures have known about the combination of sound and music, as well as combining it with these sort of plant medicines and psychedelic therapies. East Forest, I really admire your acknowledgement and inclusion of some of the ancient practices and the indigenous practices as you lead your ceremony concerts, which I also really love and admire. Maybe you can share with the audience a little bit, shed some light on just tying in the ancient knowledge that's been here for a very long time.
Well, I think that's, on one level, it'd be foolish not to appreciate and honor the technologies that have been developed for thousands of years. And then there's a nuanced line to not appropriate it and extract it, but it's both. but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be learning. And especially when the purpose of this, for all intents and purpose, is to help other people heal. So it's like, how can we do this in the best way? Let's learn from the past. I think the line gets a little murkier when the intention maybe is about profit through a corporation. That's like, hey, we're beholden to our shareholders to make a profit. Therefore, that's our legal obligation. I haven't been in those worlds so much, so it's really, I've just been focusing on. I was just always interested, quite frankly, in if I'm playing music, what's going to assuage people's fears and have the most positive, gently powerful experience for them. So I just wanted to learn, and like I think I said earlier, there wasn't a lot out there to learn from, aside from firsthand experiences. And I mean, honestly, what better way than to go just experience things and you have a felt experience. And I learned a lot of things from Peruvian shamans and Lakota sweat lodges, some very traditional practices. I think that the Lakota sweat lodge is a good example. Like, I participated in a few, and I got the honor of tending the fire as well, which was a great honor to sort of be on the serving side of it. And it's a very specific technology for that. It's like, and it's very strict because it's not meant to change. Otherwise, it would just dilute very quickly as people start, I want to add this and I'm going to do that. It's like, this is how it's been developed, and you do it this way. You always do it this way in this particular practice. And I thought that was really beautiful, because then I got to experience something that's been developed for a long, long time. And so there are a lot of things in there that are both practical and concrete, and then also very spiritual. But a lot of the concrete stuff, I mean, you'll notice, for instance, that most ceremonies, well, first off, almost every ceremony involves music and songs. So there's just that. The central role of music to be the guide. And in some ceremonies, like with Icaros and ayahuasca, thought of actually calling forth the spirit is the songs, not the medicine. The songs are calling it forth. Like, it's integral to the experience. So there's just the recognition that I think a major blind spot, I think, right now in the discussion, the two things are the role of accessibility, as Sara talked about. That's maybe less of a blind spot, but it's an important leading edge of where we're at. And the role of ceremony and music and ritual in like this, the experience itself. We talk a lot about preparation and integration and legalities, but there's a little less talking about, well, what role does intention, ceremony, and particularly music as a central pillar, how does that change the experience? How can we do this better? And I recognize it's a difficult conversation because it's an art. It's an art form. It's not as quantifiable to just say, well, you do these keys in this way. It doesn't work that way. But I think that's a really interesting place we're at, is also, like, as we're starting to onboard more mainstream artists who are interested in this space. And there are very few that have kind of put something out there, but as more people inevitably will, it's like, well, how do we cultivate and sort of midwife more artists into this space to say, how can we help to inform a process that is truly challenging to say, how do you do it? It's more, how do you develop different flavors of musical ice cream? But inside ceremonies, like many start with some kind of rhythm or drum at the beginning, and that probably is, people learning way back when about entraining the brain and getting us into shamanic states, into trance states, into these places where we have the ability to plant seeds in our unconscious. And I'm sure that has something to do with neuroplasticity. People learn this. And so a lot of times I would try to mirror these structures early on and try them and play with them and see how it worked. And there's a lot to say about overtones. And you see the richness of things that create lots of overtones, like Tibetan bowls or gongs. And we've probably all anecdotally experienced how powerful that can feel, these vibrations, literally on our body at certain moments in the experience. Like there was receptivity that we have. So honestly, there's probably a wealth of information to mine about, it's like asking a fish what water is when we talk about sound and music. It's just, I mean, we're doing it right now. We literally just take it for granted, or the fact that music is more popular now on the planet than it's ever been, like drastically so, how much it's in our lives. And we do use it as a tool, just largely unconsciously. Well, you start adding in the psychedelic element in the therapeutic landscape, and I think we've barely cracked the surface into like what we could learn on a scientific level about. It's such a beautiful marriage of art and science that in itself is creating kind of bridge into the scientific domain that maybe is the future of science. Is like, I mean, I hate using the word quantum, but the quantum world is showing us that, it's where ones and zeros break down, and that's sort of what music and art does. It's speaking about the mystery with no edge, as Eric Davis said, and so I think it's a really wonderful frontier.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. I'm excited to circle back to you. I want to hear more just about your opinions on the new role of the artist after having these experiences and this expanded awareness. Like, I think it changes the responsibility of artists. But first, I want to jump to Sara. It felt like you were really resonating with a lot of what East Forest was saying. And in me doing my research on you, I really appreciated just hearing how you approach a session. It has almost a ceremonial element to it, and your emphasis on intention and integration and all of these things. Just, I'd love to hear more from you.
Yes, the spirit in me is so excited for this conversation. So I'm going to do my best to not go on too many tangents and honor what's most alive for me right now. So when it comes to ritual and ceremony, I want to circle back to a point that you made, East Forest, just around the importance of it and what it means. And I learned from a medicine by the name of Charlotte Jane, shout out to the Ancestor Project, that ritual and ceremony are incredibly grounding. And I think that part of some of the challenges that folks experience, whether it's in psychedelic assisted therapy or if folks are taking psychedelics in other settings, is because of a lack of ceremony or a lack of ritual that helps to ground a person in the experience. And the process of ritual, of course, is very intentional. Intention setting is very intentional. Integration is also intentional, just because someone can have incredible insights from a psychedelic experience all day long, but it's really about integrating those experiences and insights into daily practice if you're really trying to, from my perspective, integrate the knowledge that and the wisdom that you've received during these experiences. And I would say, just to talk a little bit about my approach, it's a bit intuitive. That, of course, I have some skill sets and some tools that I am coming into the session with, but a lot of what I've learned has been really honoring the intuitive part of me that says, hey, change this playlist, or hey, add more drumming sounds, or whether it's finding it in a playlist in the moment actively in the dosing session. Or I remember during one ketamine dosing session, I had on some earrings that a medicine person gave me. And at the bottom of the earrings were these beads. And if I like shook the beads in a certain way, that it created this rhythm. And the patient that I was seeing at the time, they were going through, or they were trying to just move through their experience. And I'm like literally like sitting on the floor next to the patient as they're sitting on the couch. And I just take my earrings and I start making this beat live in session. And the patient ended up saying how that just listening to that rhythm was incredibly grounding for them. And so I'm really curious to explore or to see how the psychedelic medicine field evolves to really welcome those intuitive practices and acknowledge intuitive practices that make up such an important part of this therapy.
Love that. Thank you. Maybe we can pass the mic to Dr. Vines. I kind of have a two-part question for you, just piggybacking off of what Sara was talking about. One, I'm hoping that you can maybe speak on the work that you're doing with Wavepaths to create music that's really personalized for the experience. I know in ceremony, as well as in these clinical settings, it is a very intuitive process and it's really tailored to the participant. So maybe you could share some of the work that Wavepaths is doing to create music for these experiences, but also, if you can, speaking on, I listened to a podcast where you spoke on how music is used in the integration process to help us remember moments in the experience. I think you said something to the effect of music kind of putting timestamps on moments throughout the journey. And I love that. I would love to hear you speak more.
Oh, lovely. So Wavepaths is part of the field of work looking to tune into maximizing the potential of this important setting variable, which is music. That's one way to look at it in the context of psychedelic assisted therapies. And the way Wavepaths is approaching this is by putting human music first. So commissioning music from wonderful artists. I am honored to say that East Forest is one of the contributors of music to Wavepaths, and people like him who are deep into the art and sensitive to the experience of people undergoing these kinds of changes in consciousness. So we have brought together music commissioned by these artists and musicians, and that music is contributed in such a way that it can be combined together in the moment to serve a particular need of the person undergoing the session. So it can be combined to realize a particular emotional quality or a particular level of depth or intensity of experience. What the therapist is doing, it's currently a platform for therapists. The therapist creates a trajectory for the experience in advance of the session, taking into account the duration related to the psychodynamics of the treatment and so on, the depth, the dosage level and so on, what drug is involved, obviously, the medicine. And the system then generates the music over the course of the experience to fit with that trajectory that they've created or designed. The music is made in the moment, and so it's new for each and every session. And this will connect back with your second question. That means that it's novel to the listener as they're undergoing the session. So that's more or less the way it works. It's being used already by hundreds of ketamine clinics, which, as Sara mentioned, is the legal treatment or the most widely supported treatment from a legal perspective, certainly for off-label use in the US and elsewhere. Thousands of sessions have been run with this treatment. And of course, I'm interested in data, and it's wonderful to see the positive effects overall, but of course, particularly exciting to see individuals express what they've experienced. And some of these you could call testimonial forms of feedback are really inspiring and profound, and of course lead us to put all the more work and effort into improving the system. So that's more or less how Wavepaths works. And I guess one more aspect of this, which is important, is that the therapist can influence what's happening in the moment. So they do create a trajectory beforehand, but then at any point during the session, it's possible to change the music, switching to a different emotional quality or a different level of intensity. And that gives a lot of flexibility. The idea is that for this to be like a living instrument that the therapist is working with to personalize the experience to the needs of the client or the person undergoing the treatment. You can even change specific timbres that are present. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of the way the system works. So that's kind of addressing that first question. In terms of integration, so of course, integration is an important part of these psychedelic assisted therapies that are being developed, the programs that are utilizing these and to complement psychotherapy and otherwise are very much interested in how to take these experiences during the session and to help emphasize the important moments of development, the aspects of the experience that have provided insights that can then lead to positive changes for the individual, for the person. And that comes down to integration. So how do you integrate these experiences into life going forward? And music can play a very powerful role here. So we talked about music and neuroplasticity. It has an amazing potential to create impressions in the brain. The brain, from one perspective, is this prediction machine. We are living in what Anil Seth would call a constrained, hypothesis-driven hallucination. So when we dream, there's no constraint. We are literally thinking of anything and we don't second guess when things are upside down or inside out. But when we're awake, our hallucination is constrained by information that we're accumulating through our senses. And there's this constant interaction between what we expect and what we're receiving from input from the senses. So music is like catnip for this prediction machine in the brain. It is filled with so much structure. It has structure in the form of rhythm. It has structure in the form of melodic content. And by structure, I mean events that enable the brain to predict what's coming next. So if you hear just a few events in sound, East Forest plays some chords or a few notes that help suggest some kind of meter, then the brain immediately is predicting where the next event will be. It's very fast to recognize meter, and the same thing goes with melodic development and also harmony. So when you have so much structure, that enables the brain to develop strong memories. And interestingly, music creates some of the most powerful memories, even deep into late stage dementias, when people really suffer from neurodegenerative disorders. People will still respond to music in a very profound way, and it can restore their sense of self. It's one of the few stimuli that can reach people even in that very degraded state of neural functioning. So it has this deep connection with us. And as a result of building these strong memories, it is a very useful tool for integration. To loop back, over the course of the experience, when you have a profound insight or an understanding or an experience that is a breakthrough moment, the music is there and it can be tied to the music. The brain is not only making impressions about one thing, but it's connecting it to everything else that's happening. So the music, like you said, becomes kind of a timeline of sorts And so if you can go back through the music, it can actually help to recreate or re-access those moments of import during the session. And this is also related to my point about the music being new that comes out of Wavepaths every time. The idea being that there aren't any past associations. So all associations are going to be freshly created over the course of the session. This music is for this person. It is only for them and their experience. And so it can be, hopefully, particularly useful for developing these kinds of integration experiences that help with that process.
Fascinating. Thank you. Thank you for that. I want to pass the mic to East Forest now. Maybe you can share with us a little bit, piggybacking off of what Dr. Vines was just sharing. You can tell us about some of the music that you're making, contributing to Wavepaths, your Music for Mushrooms project, as well as tying in that question about the role of the artist now that we have this awareness of the power of sound and when it's combined with these therapeutics.
Sure. I think there's absolutely room for a lot of different approaches to guiding ceremonies. So I applaud what Wavepaths is undergoing with generative music, and there's a few other things out there. And as I was saying, with like artists themselves, and the path that I'm taking individually is a little bit different in that I'm really interested. One of the things I learned from attending indigenous ceremonies was the way a singular artist or shaman is carrying you through the journey. And I find that particularly valuable and interesting, this sort of one artistic voice from start to finish. Now, that's why I started making albums like Music for Mushrooms or the In album that I released. And I started this platform called Journey Space for the same reason. It's one, to offer online facilitation. That's to meet the question of access that we were talking about, making it cheaper. And the other is providing music. And the music that I'm making for that platform, yes, the downside is you have to make a lot of music. The upside for me is that I get to have it be an expression, this artistic expression from start to finish. And the thing that I found myself when I was in ceremonies, all that really mattered, or the underlying fundamental thing that was the most important, was that the music was coming from the heart. It was the intention of the music. It didn't even matter the performance of it, the instrument, if it was a voice or if it was electronic or if it was something else. And I took that to heart. And that's kind of my North Star when I'm creating the music, is not like me thinking about what people want, or it's just, is it enlivening that part of myself that feels true and real? Because I'm a human being and other people are human beings. And like that seems to be the right direction to point things. And so I think that's a very important aspect to remember when creating music for this space, is its intention and is it imbued with heart. And I know that's a frustrating thing to hear, because it's like, well, what is that? That's the mystery. That's the ineffable. But it's the je ne sais quoi of like, does it have the bhav, as they would say with Indian music. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And what's even better is like, I think all the more reason for there to be lots of options out there is this is a matter of taste. And I think it's important that we have different flavors of this out there, because part of access to this space is relevance. And so it's not necessary to say that I have the right music or answers for everyone. It needs to be developed from other groups and cultures so they can have their own relevance that speaks to them and from their past. And I have a friend in our circles who does hip hop ceremonies. Great. I mean, if that works for him and his community, more power to you. It's just to say, it's nice. It'd be nice. I look forward to a future where we have a lot of options, because there really aren't right now. But I particularly like I'm excited by ones where there's an artist that takes you from start to finish. It's sort of like, it's an artistic work in itself. And there's something interesting that's anti-playlist, in that playlists are taking music that is being used off-label, so to speak. none of it was designed for that usage. So not only can you create all sorts of elements that make it really conducive to psychedelic therapy guidance, but you're also not, as an experiencer, every single time the music changes. I would experience this for myself in ceremonies when I would test other playlists. I'm like, it's like, okay, who just walked into the room? I got to get used to this soul. Okay, just as I'm getting used to it, okay, I'm vibing. It changes to a new one. I'm like, alrighty. There's a comfort level to, an ayahuasca ceremony I was in a long time ago. This shaman was fierce, man. He just had a rattle. And it was just doom, 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 doom. And it took me a while to be like, I can get on this train, but I got on the train. And he had me. He held me, I didn't have to then reorient to the pinch hitter who came in and is like, now I'm bringing in, my bulwark or something. So neither's right or wrong. I'm always interested in what works really well and what kind of helps people through this experience. And I think that's really the name of the game. It's like, what are the things we find that works with the largest group of people? And particularly in a modern context from Western ears, that's what I'm interested in. People who aren't, maybe they're like, I don't know anything about any of this. I don't know about music. I don't know about psychedelics, but I'm interested. I want to walk them into this process and hopefully have it be not traumatic, harm reduction, and positive.
Thank you for that. It's exciting times as more creators step into this space, as you're saying. It'll be really interesting to see where it goes. So unfortunately, we are bumping up against our time. And quickly, I would like to go around one final time. I know this is a very broad subject matter and there's a lot of different nuances and we're all very passionate about different pieces. So I want to go around one final time and maybe just share any final words that you want people to take away from this discussion, and maybe let us know where we can find you, anything you are working on that we should look out for. Let's start with Sara.
Yes, I just want to say that I have learned so much in this conversation and am feeling very grateful to be in conversation with you all today. And my final words are really just around this last response session that we just had around what works well with music, the importance of music and integration, music as a timeline. And my final comment would be that music can help you remember. And I've seen this particular phrase illustrated through a story where a participant was listening to music chants, and he wanted to have those chants on a loop. And so I ended up in real time going to the computer and finding an album that had the chants that he requested. And from that decision, or from that selection, this participant processed some really powerful, transformative, traumatic childhood experiences. And yeah, it just, to me, that experience reminded me that music helps you remember things that are wonderful and positive in your life, and some things that might not be so positive or might be traumatic, and that music can really help you move through the experiences. And being able to have a playlist or have instruments or access to things that are culturally sensitive for your experience is an important part of the journey. And if folks are interested in continuing the conversation with me, they can reach out to me via LinkedIn at Sara Reed. And I'll leave the link in the description to our website at www.minds.ihealth.com.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sara. If we can jump to Dr. Vines, any final words?
So thanks again for having me, and delighted to have the conversation. And I would say, before I forget, Wavepaths just launched a new website. So there's a lot of interesting material on there for listeners and therapists, if that's of interest. For reaching out to me, like Sara, I can be reached on LinkedIn. So would love to hear from anyone interested in carrying the conversation forward. And otherwise, thinking back to something that East Forest said about culture and artists leading the way. Indeed, science is usually behind. Discovering that turmeric is healthy, or certain ways of approaching music for therapy. Culture and artists are ahead, and science is catching up. But I think science may be nipping at the heels of the artist. Every once in a while, we get a chance to make a contribution. The science does, and hopefully there will be some interesting breakthroughs that come out of the research in this area related to music. But indeed, much to talk about and a lot of inspiration, hopefully in both directions.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Vines. And last but certainly not least, East Forest, any final words and any exciting projects that we can look out for from you?
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone on this conversation. I'm just excited for what's coming ahead and where we're at, and I want to recognize that mistakes will be made, and it probably will be a somewhat messy process, and that's okay. This is the process of revelation and discovery and experimentation, and for us, there seems to be largely a spirit of cooperation and collaboration, which I appreciate. I think most people in this realm, at their core, are doing this because they've had their own experience that was meaningful, and they want to share that with others, which is beautiful. Some companies and people get a little lost, but I trust that something is emerging here, and I'm in service to that. And I'm excited for where that can lead. And I think it's in the nick of time. So not that this is the only answer, but it's a powerful tool in our toolkit to use for transformation at a time when one society is dying and another is being born. And we need to midwife that process because the other is dying. And that's whether we like it or not. So in a time of collapse, it takes a lot of bravery to step forward in something that's new and hasn't yet emerged, and we don't really know where it's going to go. But that's the calling of our time. And so I want to honor everyone who is stepping forward in that bravery and say that I'm scared too, but I can hold someone else and they can hold us through this process. And it's happening. It's happening. So I have a lot of fun things going on, but most of it you can find at eastforest.org, the Journey Space platforms at journeyspace.com. And I also perform live. I'm heading, I don't know when this is airing, but so there's lots of events going on out there, and I like to always see people in the real world and have real experiences together with music. So I look forward to crossing paths with folks.
Amazing. Thank you. That's a great way to close this wonderful conversation. I want to thank each of you for being here with us, truly. I know I've certainly learned a lot from this discussion. I'm sure the audience has as well. And it's my hope that you will stay in touch, and hopefully we can further this discussion, because as you can see, it's hard to get it all into this short amount of time. So hopefully we can speak more on this in the future. But yeah, I would just like to thank the audience for being here, for supporting us. Thank you to our partners, Studio Feed, SUBPAC, and Signal, for your support. And if you want to learn more about Project Immersed, catch us at projectimmersed.org. And yeah, one final thank you, and we will see you next time.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.